The Girl Who Built a Spider by George Brewington, Chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9, Beware the Envious. A department store without a perfume counter or racks of clothes or kiosks filled with purses or dressing rooms or dividing walls or wandering customers seems very large and very empty, and a space that any 12-year-old scientist would instinctively want to run wild through. That's exactly what John did. He raced through Teresa's laboratory in one big circle, laughing and yelling just to hear his own voice echo. "This is amazing!" he screamed. Teresa walked through the space slowly, as if she were stepping into a dream. She wouldn't have thought or even hoped that this could happen to her, to be given a laboratory big enough to build whatever she wanted. Anything at all. She put down her spider, stretched her arms out wide, and slowly spun around. But did Dr. Flax not think she would need additional supplies, tools, and maybe some spare parts? She supposed she could bring in some scrap from her Uncle Robert's auto repair shop, and she didn't mind using her own portable arc welding kit. But couldn't he have at least provided her a table to work on? But her question was soon answered when John ran down the escalator to the first floor. "Hey, you guys, you gotta see this!" Teresa followed. As she walked down to the lower level, a joy began to grow in her, a joy very much like the excitement she felt walking down the stairs many past Christmas mornings, knowing that magnificent mechanical toys had magically appeared in the night and now lay waiting for her, lovingly displayed in a semicircle on the living room floor for her to find and unwrap and tinker with all day. It was a joy big enough to let her forget about the black hole inside her, at least for a while. As she moved off the last step of the escalator, she saw an incredible sight spread before her, and the growing joy filled her all the way up. The entire first floor of her lab was a robot builder's paradise. A row of brand new torches of all sizes for soldering, brazing, and welding lay in a neat row before her. Behind them, there were 3D printing machines of all sizes, rods and sheets of aluminum, and every possible joint and hinge and hook. There were electric lights, a variety of seats and steering wheels, and a toolbox so big it had wheels and an engine of its own. She had never seen such a thing, a toolbox that could be driven like a truck. There were stacks of boxes and crates of car parts, truck parts, boat parts, jet ski parts, and even snowmobile parts, even though it hadn't snowed in South Carolina for 5 years. There were chains and nets and ropes and appliances she couldn't even identify. There was a forklift, too, which required a license to operate, a license she didn't have, but there it was for her to use anyway. There were computers, lots of computers, every kind Teresa had heard of, and many she had not. Laptops and desktops, spare circuit boards, extra microprocessors, and an electric whiteboard like John and Ashley's. She can only imagine how many kinds of software were available to help her design whatever she liked. She might have stood there all day admiring it if Zachary didn't groan from impatience. "Let me tell you your lock combination," he said. "I have far more important things than babysitting awaiting me." Teresa cleared her mind. She certainly didn't want to forget the combination, but she didn't want to have to ask for it twice like Ashley. Zachary leaned down, cupped his hand to her ear, and whispered it quickly and impatiently. "Boykin Spaniel, loggerhead sea turtle, blue crab, blue crab, blue crab, red-tailed hawk, great egret." It was a long password, but the 3 blue crabs in the middle would make it easier to remember. And with her favorite dog at the beginning and a beautiful egret at the end, she knew she had it. She repeated it to herself just to make sure as she walked in circles around her laboratory. Her laboratory. It was so big, almost too big. She made herself dizzy taking it all in. But even while she was so ecstatic, so thrilled to have a space of her own with all the welding, designing tools she'd ever need, she couldn't ignore the guilt she felt. She could feel Ashley's energy behind her. She didn't dare look, but she knew Ashley was standing at the top of the escalator, looking down at her, radiating envy and frustration and downright anger. Finally, Teresa couldn't ignore her any longer. She turned around to face her. "It's not fair," Ashley growled between her teeth. You're not satisfied with your lab?" Zachary asked with a bit of mockery. Ashley didn't answer. "Dr. Flax wanted you to have the very best in accommodations, Miss Dean. If you feel that you've been cheated in any way, I will consider it my duty to tell him." Ashley remained silent. It was obvious to all of them that Zachary would very much enjoy telling his uncle that she was not grateful for his efforts. But Ashley would not behave so improperly. "No," she finally said, looking down at her feet and straightening her polka dot dress. "I like my vet lab very much. I will get to work right away." Then she walked out of Teresa's laboratory and back to her own. Teresa wanted to chase after her. She almost said, "Hey, if you'd like to trade laboratories, we can." Almost. But she did not, because she realized Ashley might just take her up on it. "Someone is apparently quite jealous," Zachary said as he began to leave. "Why?" Teresa asked. "Her lab is just as cool. Even if it's not as big, hers has tons of aquariums and algae and a big clay oven. She even has a waterfall and real-life fish." Zachary chuckled softly. "Some cannot stand to take second place no matter how great their own rewards," he said. "Beware the envious, Miss Brown. They think they have to destroy your world before they can create their own." Zachary walked slowly away, and there Teresa was with a whole laboratory to create whatever she wanted and a whole summer to do it. She felt very anxious at that moment, suddenly realizing she was supposed to, expected to, do something fantastic and world-changing and bigger than anything she had done before. She felt very alone, until she realized that John had returned to the upper level to run in more circles. "Echo! Echo! Echo!" he yelled as he flew. "We are the greatest scientists in the world! No one can stop us! Flax Industries is amazing!" Chapter 10. Possibility. John eventually went back to his lab to explore and start manufacturing even greater bubbles. Left alone, Teresa turned on one of the computers and found her favorite online music station, all Disney musicals. The computer was attached to a pair of speakers 6 feet tall. She turned the volume up to 11. Then she danced. While Be Our Guest echoed through her laboratory, she twirled around her computers and her set of welding torches and her 3D printers, the biggest of which took up the entire former fitting room of the girls' clothing department. She sang as loud as she wanted because this space was all hers to create whatever she wanted, all because of a spontaneous whim to enter a science fair. Well, at least for the summer. Then, less than 3 months from now, she would start 8th grade. She would be taking chemistry and physics, dropping eggs with parachutes and dissecting unfortunate frogs. Would 8th grade be the most anticlimactic school year ever after a summer like this? She couldn't help but think about it. Would she have to go back to playing with pocket-sized robots at the lunch table while her friends talked about soccer? As a scientist, she wondered, am I peaking at 12 years old? Is it all downhill from here? She pushed these questions out of her mind and tried to concentrate. Dr. Flax had said she should try to create something that would make the world a better place. It was a tall order. What did he mean exactly? She knew her invention should be something that made the world a cleaner place, or at least not a dirtier one. That much was obvious. And she decided a good invention would make life easier for people instead of harder. But what could do that? She stopped dancing and sat on the floor in front of her spider with her knees to her chin. She felt a peaceful calm flow through her. She really loved this spider. She was like a pet that Teresa had raised since she was a baby. In her early stages, she was nothing more than a platform of Legos and 8 simple servo motors that controlled her legs. But from there, she had grown and grown. The Lego platform had been replaced with an aluminum sheet, and Teresa soon gave her legs twice their original length, welded from scrap. Before long, her spider wasn't operated with a remote control, but by actually sitting on her and controlling her with a steering wheel. Teresa was always tinkering with her and making her better, and with each change she made, she loved her spider that much more. But was her spider an invention that could make the world a better place? Teresa didn't know. She was solar powered, so at least she didn't add pollution to the air. Did she belong in next year's Flax Inventions for a Better World catalog? She didn't know that either. Teresa wished she was more like Ashley. Ashley was so dedicated to making the world a better place with science. Even if she was really uptight and kind of mean, at least she knew who she was and why she was doing it. You could tell right away that she had ambition. Teresa didn't doubt that Ashley would someday end starvation because she wasn't going to let anyone tell her she couldn't. Teresa worried she didn't have that kind of drive. But then she also wished she was more like John. He liked bubbles because he liked bubbles. Simple as that. She doubted he cared what anyone else thought about him. Not caring gave him the freedom to truly be himself. John might make the world a better place if making the world a better place happened to coincide with making bubbles. She doubted he cared about the Flax Inventions for a Better World catalog. He probably hadn't even read it. Teresa really only knew one thing. She wanted to live in a world where mothers didn't drown in floods. But if she or Dr. Flax couldn't make that happen, then second best would be to love this spider by making her better. "But what do you want, girl?" she asked her spider. "Do you want to be bigger or faster? Do you want to jump or climb?" Teresa held her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth, waiting for her spider to answer. "Do you want to shoot a web?" She caught her breath by her own question. Of course she wanted to shoot a web. She was a spider, after all. Teresa thought about it, her chin between her knees. Sticky ropes? No, that seemed impractical. Her spider would have to shoot a web so strong that she could pull her own weight and a rider and a passenger up a wall. That was more than 100 pounds. To accomplish that, a spider would need grappling hooks. She stood up excitedly and started looking through all the supplies Dr. Flax had provided for her. There were so many boxes and crates. It was fun opening them to discover all the tools and attachments. She forgot more than once what she was looking for, but eventually she uncovered a cardboard box packed with brand new 3-pronged hooks. They would work perfectly. Then, even though Dr. Flax had provided her computers equipped with the latest design software, Teresa used pen and paper to sketch 2 slingshots that she would attach to 2 swiveling handles. The slingshots would fire the grappling hooks tethered to zip lines in any direction she liked. But was there a zip line in her laboratory? After searching for 10 minutes and being frequently distracted, she found a whole roll of it. Then she uncovered 2 fishing reels that she could attach to the slingshots and use to reel in the zip line after she fired the hooks. She'd be able to pull herself toward whatever the hooks had grabbed. The design had come to her quickly and easily, as her best ideas always did. Next was the fun part, bringing her drawing to life. She picked out a torch and a mask and was soon welding the slingshots out of the aluminum and stainless steel rods piled neatly for her in a corner. It was almost as if Dr. Flax had anticipated all the supplies she would need to improve her spider, even before she knew what those improvements would be. Next, she got to work on the swiveling handles. She attached these 2 mounts on either side of the driver's seat. By 11 o'clock, her spider was much improved, nearly ready to shoot a web and climb walls. She was so engrossed in welding and humming Disney songs, she didn't know how long Dr. Flax had been standing behind her. "Hello there," he finally shouted over the music and the buzz of a generator. She jumped out, but quickly recovered when she saw it was him. She turned off her torch, lifting her welding mask, shut off the music, turned and smiled. "Hello," she said quietly. Dr. Flax was wearing his excessively pocketed white overalls and his rubber wading boots, and was completely drenched. His mop of white and black curls was a tangled mess, but he didn't acknowledge how wet he was, so neither did she. He said, examining her work.
Dual grappling hooks, I see. A logical addition. A spider should be able to shoot a web and climb up a wall, shouldn't it?
Exactly what I was thinking, Teresa said proudly. He smiled and paced around her work. He leaned in close to examine the swivel mounts and ran his finger along the freshly welded joints.
Very nice craftsmanship. Good fusion. No globs, no cracks.
Thanks, she said. She knew what she was doing.
I've just spoken with Miss Dean and Mr. Cooper. Miss Dean wants to create a whole variety of new algae foods that could be easily shipped to the most remote parts of the world. Mr. Cooper is building a bubble organ. I don't know what he means exactly, but his excitement is infectious. What's next after grappling hooks, Miss Brown?
She thought about it. I don't know, she finally said. Then there was a long, awkward pause. Teresa was quite used to these pauses in her life. She rarely knew what to say in conversations with adults. Well, anyone, really. But she didn't want to have an awkward pause with the famous Dr. Flax. He was so selfless, seeming to care only about others, like her dad. And he was so passionate about robots and creating things, like herself. He was more interested in her invention than fetching himself a towel. He sat down on a pile of sheet metal. Aren't you cold? She finally dared to ask. He patted down his wet overalls and smiled.
I'm fine, he said. I'm more frustrated than cold.
Why? He laughed as if she had told him a good joke, even though she had no idea what that joke might be. Dr. Flax lost himself in thought for a bit, not seeming to mind that another awkward pause was inflating the space between them.
Well, he finally said, I have yet to find Thomas. On top of that, my latest invention continues to frustrate and confound me, and I'm all wet.
Dr. Flax ran his hand through his curly wet locks and let out a big, exasperated sigh. Maybe now was not the time to probe, but Teresa wanted to know so badly. May I ask you a question, Dr. Flax?
Of course, Miss Brown,
he said quietly. What is your latest invention?
Well, he said, it's quite ambitious. It's either my magnum opus or my greatest failure. Hard to tell at this stage. The laws of thermodynamics can be awfully stubborn. I call it my big zero. I think it's something that might really slow climate change and return balance to our planet.
What does it do? She asked. Then hopefully, can it stop hurricanes? He smiled, shut his eyes, and clapped his hands quietly together.
Perhaps it can stop hurricanes, if I could only get it right.
Another long silence hung between them. What if you can't? Dr. Flax shrugged.
Then I will have failed, and not for the first time either, but that's okay. With every failure, I learned something, Miss Brown, and learned something is always worthwhile.
He smiled again, but it seemed forced. In his eyes, she saw that he was lost, sad, and tired. I want to protect our environment too, she said quickly. I wish I could make something like Ashley's edible algae that could end hunger. I wish I had an idea like that. That would be really cool.
That would be cool,
he agreed.
You know, Miss Brown, you should tell Miss Dean you think so. She would appreciate the compliment. She's quite intimidated by you.
What did he say? Teresa was sure that she had never intimidated anybody in her whole life, least of all Ashley Dean, student body president of Daniel Island Middle School. I don't know why, she said softly. I'm not as smart as she is. I'm just good at tinkering with robots.
You think too little of your solar-powered robotic spider, he said. I see great potential for it to change this planet, for one thing. Your spider leaves no carbon footprint.
Yes, Teresa agreed, but neither does a bicycle.
True, he said excitedly, clapping his hands. And we don't owe the great Carl von Drais applause for inventing the bicycle.
Dr. Flax wiped the wet hair out of his eyes one more time.
Surely you've imagined a world where everyone owns a solar-powered robotic spider with dual grappling hooks. No potholes or fallen trees could stop this fine vehicle.
Teresa tried to hide a smile. A mechanical spider like hers was in every garage in America seemed a rather silly idea.
You must think big, Miss Brown,
Dr. Flax said, seeming to read her thoughts.
Always thinking big. Your spider might cut highway traffic in half, which in turn would cut carbon emissions significantly, which in turn would reduce global warming, and which in turn would slow down hurricanes. And I think driving a spider would be much more fun than driving a boring old car. Also, I wonder how such a spider would fare on ice.
As soon as Dr. Flax said it, he lost himself in a daydream. Teresa didn't know if she should say something until he finally did.
Yes,
he said slowly.
On ice. Tell me, could you give it skis?
He crawled behind the spider and crouched down to inspect the underbelly. Skis. Yes, she might be able to give her spider skis. She immediately began to think about how wide they would have to be, where they would fit, and how much weight they would have to bear. Because every time she added something to her spider, she became that much more heavy and less agile.
What do you think? Is there a possibility?
The doctor asked. Oh, she had forgotten to answer out loud. I think skis are a wonderful idea, she said proudly. Dr. Flax stood up and shook his hair like a happy dog trotting out of a lake.
Well then, I'm glad I could help. But now I must leave you because I am soaked. Marie is quite sore with me as she believes I'll catch a cold. I programmed her to protect the owner of Flax Industries at all costs. But what kind of father would I be if I didn't search for my lost son because of a little rain? But the little rascal continues to elude me, as does the solution to my big zero. However, he said with a deep and sad sigh, a robot who does not want to be found will not be found, and the laws of thermodynamics will change for no one, not even me.
Teresa didn't know what to say. She thought it was sweet that Dr. Flax referred to Thomas as his lost son, just as she thought of her spider as her baby girl. Dr. Flax perked up and shook his wet overalls one more time.
I will let you finish installing your grappling hooks, Miss Brown. I'm quite impressed with your work. Zachary is preparing salads. He really makes magic with roasted pecans. A spider builder must not forget to take care of herself. I don't want your father accusing me of starving you, okay?
Teresa smiled shyly. Dr. Flax clapped his hands quietly together. Then he whispered his thoughts to her or himself, or perhaps to no one at all.
Imagine a world crawling with gigantic solar-powered spiders equipped with grappling hooks and retractable skis. Wouldn't that be something?